20 disturbing religious movies, 7 levels. This iceberg is made up of some of the most disturbing cult-based movies ever made. We'll start with some of the more typical religious movies, but the further we get, the more insane things will become. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. The Reaping, 2007. In The Reaping, Catherine Winter arrives in Haven, Louisiana as a former believer turned skeptic who debunks supposed miracles. She's been drawn into town by a river running red after a boy's unexplained death, and the town's belief that his sister has something to do with it. But dinner at a local teacher's house ends with flies swarming every dish and frogs rain from the sky the next morning, each event echoing the biblical plagues Catherine once dismissed on scientific grounds. Her calm questions about water samples and chemical tests are dismissed because the locals have become convinced there is something supernatural at play, some rituals in a ruined church basement that all circle back to a 12-year-old named Lauren McConnell. They follow Lauren's trail to a hidden cellar that leads to an occult chamber lined with dusty symbols and a crude altar. On one shelf lie the tiny skeletal remains of sacrificed victims, while tattered books promise ancient supernatural rites. The town's inherited cult has been gathering here for generations. Every second-born child pledged to carry the devil's mark. They believe Lauren is that second child. Above, townsfolk shave their children's heads to ward off lice, an excuse to conceal the fact that they're really marking them for ritual. As the chaos piles up, Father Constigan warns that an angel, who he believes is Catherine, must end this.
The cult will be powerless against you. You can stop them.
Flames erupt in his room, consuming him in a sudden blaze. At the McConnell house, Lauren's mother confesses her daughter serves him and turns a gun on herself as the armed mob closes in. In the chaos that follows, Catherine corners Lauren with a knife only to discover that Lauren is not a devil, she's an angel. Lauren healed her brother's wound, but he died instead. As fire rains down on the firstborn townsfolk, only the innocent survive as Catherine escapes with Lauren. But on a highway at dawn, Lauren reveals Catherine's second child stirs within her. This time, it will carry the devil's mark, meaning all of this is going to start over. The Possession, 2012. The Possession takes a uniquely Jewish approach to demonic horror, centering on 10-year-old M. Brennick and her family's encounter with a dieback box purchased at a yard sale. This carved wooden container holds a lot more than antique curiosities. It houses an evil spirit from Jewish mythology that immediately begins influencing M's behavior. The Dybbuk itself represents a very different kind of possession story than we're used to, rooted in Jewish tradition rather than Christian exorcism. This spirit, identified as Abazau, or Taker of Children, operates through 3 distinct stages of possession, with the final stage permanently binding the entity to its human host. M's transformation begins with glazed eyes, withdrawal from her already broken family, and an obsessive attachment to the box that grows stronger each day. Her vegetarian diet is abandoned in favor of gorging on raw meat from the refrigerator, her pale skin developing an unhealthy pallor, and moths begin appearing everywhere around her. The possession escalates through increasingly disturbing physical manifestations. She's able to completely remove the teeth of her mom's new boyfriend just by staring at him in one of the most horrific scenes you'll ever see. When she gets a professional MRI scan, the image reveals a monstrous face with hollow eyes residing inside her chest cavity, confirming that something else now shares her body. The family has no choice but to reach out to Rabbi Zadok from a Hasidic community in Brooklyn. Unlike traditional Christian exorcisms, this ritual involves Hebrew chanting, scriptural readings, and specific prayers designed to force the Dybbuk back into its containment box. M's convulsions reach their peak during the exorcism. Her body writhes uncontrollably as the rabbi continues his chanting, and invisible forces hurl objects around the room. But then comes the most disturbing visual in the film. After the being is passed on to M's father Clyde, it decides to break free. A naked, featureless creature roughly the size of a young child crawls out of Clyde's mouth. This entity possesses empty eye sockets where eyes should be, stringy hair, and screams directly at the camera before sliding across the floor towards the Dybbuk box where it traps itself. The creature represents the Dybbuk in its physical form, finally expelled from its human host through the power of Jewish ritual and prayer. And it is truly one of the most horrifying images you will ever see in a movie. The Church, 1989. Michele Soavi's The Church began development as something entirely different. The third installment in Dario Argento's wildly successful Demons franchise. The original Demons films trapped audiences in a movie theater and apartment building, respectively, with each location basically becoming a pressure cooker of demonic mayhem. But when Soavi stepped in to direct, he made a crucial decision that would transform the entire film. Soavi wanted something more sophisticated than the heavy metal, substance-fueled chaos of the previous Demons movies. He completely rewrote the screenplay, severing all connections to the series and creating something that stands alone. This movie is all about a Gothic cathedral built over a mass grave where Teutonic knights had slaughtered an entire village of supposed devil worshippers centuries earlier. When librarian Evan discovers a mysterious parchment and ventures into the church's catacombs, he finds a crucifix-shaped tomb that opens into an endless black void, emitting an eerie blue light. The moment he opens a sack hidden within, clawed hands reach out and grab him, marking the beginning of his possession. In the aftermath, Evan tears his own still-beating heart from his chest while standing in a phone booth, holding it up as blood drips between his fingers. The church's sacristan, who is also possessed, impales himself through the chest with an industrial jackhammer, blood spurting down the spout as flesh chunks go flying. They have no control over their own bodies. They're just victims of whatever demon has possessed them. If you can believe it, these are not the most disturbing scenes. That honor goes to the sequence involving Lisa, who becomes entranced and wanders into the candlelit catacombs where she encounters Evan, now transformed into a goat-headed demon. There's no explanation given, and really, what explanation could satisfy the questions we have about it? Soon, bodies pile up as the church seals itself shut, trapping visitors inside within the rising spirits of the massacred villagers. The gore keeps going too. A woman peels her skin off, and the whole time children witness the chaos unfolding around them. I'll be honest, there's 1,000 other things we could talk about with this movie. The ancient torment scenes, the writhing pile of fused human bodies emerging from the ground. The point is that Soavi created something that operates on pure nightmare logic. You don't understand half of it, but it has an impact. The Shrine, 2010. The Shrine opens with a horrific scene that immediately establishes the movie's tone. A man is strapped to a table, a metal mask placed over his face, when a robed figure uses a ceremonial hammer to drive the mask's spikes directly into the victim's face. Don't worry, we'll come back to that in a pretty graphic way. The movie follows 3 journalists: Carmen, her boyfriend Marcus, and intern Sarah, who travel to Poland to investigate the disappearance of American backpackers in a remote village called Alvinia. But the village and its residents don't seem to be very welcoming to their new outsiders, desperate to try and conceal something they don't want discovered. That's when the journalists discover an unnatural fog in the woods that never moves and remains concentrated in one specific area. An obviously unusual thing. But then Carmen and Sarah enter the mysterious fog and encounter a demonic statue that bleeds from its eyes and seems to whisper to them. Within minutes, they're lured into a sinister room containing multiple bodies. As they start to piece together what's happening, the trio are captured by villagers and brought to a group dressed in ceremonial robes who practice a sinister ancient ritual. Sarah is stripped, dressed in a white gown, and restrained on a stone altar. And here's where we circle back to the opening, of course. The villagers place an ornamental metal mask over her face, a mask with long spikes protruding inward from the eye areas. As the religious leader speaks in Polish, he raises a ceremonial hammer and drives the spikes through her eye sockets. Yes, her eye sockets. The blood seeps from beneath the mask as the spikes penetrate deeper. But here's the thing. The villagers' ceremonies initially appear as fanatical evil, but the film delivers a clever twist as Carmen begins seeing the villagers transform between human form and demonic appearances. She herself is also being transformed. And maybe she's starting to see what they see. Only it turns out that the villagers aren't sadistic cultists at all. They're protectors trying to contain an ancient evil. Their brutal rituals serve a purpose, it turns out. The metal mask ceremony is just a desperate attempt to destroy the demonic possession before it spreads. The movie is forcing viewers to question their initial judgments about religious practices they don't understand. By the time Marcus discovers the truth that Carmen now hosts the demonic entity, the religious rituals that seemed barbaric suddenly become the only salvation against something far worse.
Help me, Marcus.
Level 2. House of the Devil, 2009. House of the Devil is set in 1983, when America was gripped by the Satanic Panic, a nationwide hysteria about devil-worshipping cults supposedly infiltrating suburban communities. Samantha Hughes needs money for an apartment deposit, so she answers a babysitting ad that immediately screams danger. The job pays $400 for one night, which is far too much for ordinary childcare in 1983. Her friend Megan drives her to the remote Victorian mansion where Mr. and Mrs. Ullman reveal the truth.
We actually don't have a child. This job tonight is not for our child, but for my wife's mother.
There's no child to watch, just Mrs. Ullman's elderly mother upstairs. Well, Megan tries to pull Samantha away from the obvious trap, but as always, desperation wins.
It's $400 for 4 hours?
As Megan drives home through a cemetery, a stranger appears at her car window offering a light for her cigarette. But when she says she's not the babysitter, he shoots her in the face without hesitation. It turns out this is Victor, the Ullman's son, cleaning up some loose ends. Back at the house, the Ullmans disappear for their dinner plans, allowing Samantha to explore the house, uncovering photographs of a different family. They're the home's real residents, their bodies upstairs in a bedroom arranged in a pentagram formation, their blood painting occult symbols on the wall. The lunar eclipse begins just as Samantha discovers this carnage, and when Victor delivers the pizza, Samantha foolishly eats it, allowing the drugs to take over her body and knock her out. When Samantha regains consciousness, she's bound to a table in the basement, lying inside a painted pentagram. The Ullmans surround her in ceremonial robes, joined by Victor and a grotesque witch-like figure identified as Mrs. Ullman's mother. Obviously, she's far from human. The demon draws occult symbols on Samantha's stomach with blood from a goat skull, then attempts to force her to drink from the same vessel. But it turns out this is an impregnation ceremony timed to the lunar eclipse, and there's no escape. Megan's corpse is dumped in the kitchen, and even when she kills Victor, Samantha is cornered by Mrs. Ullman, who insists the process cannot be stopped. Satan will arrive when the eclipse ends. She has been chosen. The demonic faces flash through her mind as she realizes the ritual worked. Something is growing inside her. She puts the gun to her head and pulls the trigger. But the story is not over. The film cuts to news reports about the eclipse ending abruptly, confusing scientists. Samantha lies unconscious in a hospital bed while a nurse cheerfully informs someone that both she and her baby will recover, confirming that the cult succeeded and evil now has a foothold in the world through Samantha's unwilling body. The Empty Man, 2020. After an extended prologue, The Empty Man starts with what seems like a straightforward missing person case. Former detective James LaSombra is investigating the disappearance of his neighbor's teenage daughter Amanda, with the only clue being a cryptic message scrawled in blood. The Empty Man made me do it. But the deeper he gets, the more unusual the case becomes, because James discovers that Amanda and her friends had been experimenting with summoning an entity through a ritual described in an urban legend. The legend itself is simple. Find an empty bottle on a bridge, blow into it while thinking of the Empty Man, and the creature will come for you over 3 nights. First night, you hear him. Second night, you see him. Third night, he finds you. Obviously, the teenagers treat it like a game until James discovers their bodies hanging beneath the bridge. The same bloody message painted nearby. Behind this urban legend lurks the Pontifex Institute, a cult that has been orchestrating these deaths for centuries. The cult believes in tulpas, thoughts that can be manifested through collective belief. They've been using a comatose man named Paul as a vessel for the Empty Man, but Paul is dying, and they need a replacement. Fast. When James follows the cult to their remote cabin in the woods, he finds a videotape showing a possessed cult member in a state of deterioration. The man on the tape appears completely unhinged, twitching and muttering while painting the silhouette of the Empty Man on the wall using his own blood. The cabin also contains detailed files on James himself, including receipts, photographs, and personal information he never remembered sharing. The cult has been tracking him, studying him, preparing him for this. Every interaction, every coincidence, every moment of his investigation has been orchestrated, manipulating him into falling into the trap. In fact, when Amanda reappears in Paul's hospital room, she reveals that James himself is a tulpa, a construct created by the cult's collective imagination. His memories, his tragic backstory involving the death of his wife and son, even his relationship with Amanda's mother, Nora, all fabricated to make him the perfect vessel. James calls Nora, but she has no idea who he is. His entire existence spans only 3 days, built from manufactured grief and fear to attract the Empty Man. The cult needed someone broken enough to channel the entity, so they created James with a carefully constructed tragic past to make him susceptible to possession. When James finally accepts this reality, the Empty Man enters his body through his mouth, and he becomes the new vessel. The hospital staff bow to him as he ends Paul's suffering with a gunshot, completing the cycle. The Blackcoat's Daughter, 2015. Winter break arrives in the cold, isolated halls of Bramford Academy, a Catholic boarding school. But 2 students remain behind. Rose, a senior who deliberately misled her parents about pickup dates, and Kat, a freshman whose parents mysteriously failed to arrive. This setup forms the foundation of Osgood Perkins' directorial debut, The Blackcoat's Daughter, a film that weaves together multiple timelines. Let's try and get this straight. The narrative splits between 3 perspectives: Kat, Rose, and a mysterious young woman named Joan. But while they initially seem like parallel storylines, the film has something up its sleeve. It deliberately disorients viewers through its non-linear structure. As Rose sneaks away to meet her boyfriend, Kat begins exhibiting increasingly disturbing behavior. She receives cryptic phone calls from an unseen entity, whispering dark instructions and taking shelter in the boiler room, where she kneels before the furnace in ritualistic devotion. Kat, now fully under demonic influence, embarks on a mission to end the lives of everyone at the school. She stalks through darkened hallways, dispatching the 2 nuns who had been caring for the girls. When Rose returns, Kat pursues her through the building with relentless determination. The aftermath is discovered by the headmaster and police. Kat in the boiler room, surrounded by the severed heads of her victims, uttering "Hail Satan" as an offering. But that's not the twist. Joan is actually Kat just 9 years later. After being institutionalized and subjected to an exorcism, she escapes and encounters Rose's grieving parents by chance. Recognizing them from a photograph, she accompanies them back to Bramford, where history repeats itself in blood. She takes their lives, bringing their heads to the now abandoned boiler room in a desperate attempt to reconnect with her demonic companion. But it fails, leaving her completely alone. The Cleansing Hour, 2019. The Cleansing Hour follows Max and Drew, childhood friends who run a popular live stream show where Father Max performs staged exorcisms to gain followers and sell merchandise. Every episode features a supposedly possessed person who gets cleansed by Max, who, of course, pretends to be a priest. But when Drew's fiancée Lane steps in as the possessed person after their scheduled actor doesn't show, things take a terrifying turn. Lane, of course, becomes genuinely possessed by a demon, forcing Max and Drew into a real-life nightmare. The demon starts to take out crew members and demands the pair reveal their darkest secrets on air. As viewer counts skyrocket, the entity uses the broadcast for its sinister agenda. Suddenly, the demon forces Max to confront his past traumas, including his time at Catholic school where he and Drew suffered at the hands of a cruel nun. But he's not the only one falling under the influence of this evil spirit. Maybe. One of the crew members appears to have consumed intoxicating substances and begins experiencing terrifying hallucinations. Believing he's seeing something monstrous, he harms himself with a box cutter in a desperate attempt at self-protection. Then, the climax arrives and unveils the answer to all of the questions we have. After seemingly defeating the demon, Max and Drew discover they've been tricked. The entity reveals itself as Lucifer, who used Lane and the live stream to access millions of viewers worldwide. All 17 million of those viewers become possessed simultaneously, turning on those around them, creating a global catastrophe. Even the president falls victim when his own child, who watched the stream, becomes a vessel for evil. The end credits confirm that all across the world, ordinary people are now effectively agents of Satan. By pretending to be genuine religious prophets, these two guys exposed the world to true, unstoppable evil. But at least they made a few bucks, I guess. Now, if there's one thing we won't be doing, it's summoning the devil. In fact, one of the best ways to keep him away is to subscribe to our channel. Let's move on to the next level. Level 3. Red State, 2011. 3 teenagers answer an online invitation promising an intimate encounter with an older woman. The setup to a whole bunch of comedy movies. This is not one of them. The boys drive to a remote trailer where Sarah offers them drugged beer that knocks them unconscious. They wake up inside the 5 Points Trinity Church compound, trapped in cages and bound together in crawl spaces beneath the sanctuary. Pastor Abin Cooper leads this fanatical congregation modeled after real-world hate groups like Westboro Baptist Church. Cooper delivers a 15-minute sermon filled with venomous rhetoric against what he perceives as sinners, building to a predictable crescendo of religious fury. The teenagers witness the execution of a captive who has been wrapped in plastic with only a breathing hole, then shot in the head. Blood runs down the inside of the plastic wrapping as the body is dropped through a trap door onto the bound boys below. But one teenager manages to escape his restraints, leading to a shootout with church members in a room stocked with weapons. Summoned by the gunfire, Deputy Pete arrives to investigate, but is killed by Cooper's devout followers. Sheriff Winan alerts federal authorities, triggering the arrival of ATF agent Keenan and his team. Now this is where the movie shifts into a full-scale siege reminiscent of the real-life 1993 Waco incident. The federal agents receive orders to reclassify the church as a domestic terrorist cell, effectively changing their mission from rescue to total elimination. Machine gun fire erupts as both sides engage in sustained combat, with Cooper's heavily armed congregation matching the federal firepower. The film draws direct inspiration from the Waco Branch Davidian standoff, where ATF agents faced similar resistance from David Koresh's followers. It's just as disturbing to see unfold. The violence continues relentlessly as bodies pile up on both sides. Even the escaping teenager is gunned down by the sheriff, who mistakes him for a cult member. The compound becomes a war zone where survival depends on firepower rather than righteousness, culminating in a bloodbath that leaves few standing. And isn't that the inevitable endpoint for a cult? Nothing Bad Can Happen, 2013. Nothing Bad Can Happen follows Torre, a young devotee of an underground Christian punk movement called the Jesus Freaks. After helping a stranded driver named Benno through what appears to be a miracle, Torre is invited to stay with Benno's family. Initially welcomed, Torre quickly moves into a tent in their garden and becomes part of the household. The story progresses in 3 chapters: faith, love, and hope. But there's not a lot of love or hope. What begins as hospitality gradually transforms as Benno's true nature emerges, growing increasingly frustrated with Torre's unwavering faith. The family dynamic shifts when Benno starts testing Torre's religious convictions through increasingly cruel methods. He punches Torre in the face without provocation just to try and get some kind of unchristian reaction. When Torre experiences an epileptic seizure in the house, Benno mocks him and leaves him helpless on the floor. These early incidents are extremely unpleasant, but they're just foreshadowing the escalating cruelty yet to come. As the film progresses, the psychological manipulation intensifies. Benno uses Torre's faith against him, challenging his commitment to turning the other cheek, convincing the family to starve Torre, eating in front of him while denying him food. In one of the most disturbing sequences, Torre finds a piece of chicken in the trash that's molded and covered with maggots. When Benno discovers this, he forces Torre to eat the rotten chicken at the dinner table in front of everyone. The scene is prolonged and excruciating, with Benno and his girlfriend Astrid deriving pleasure from Torre's suffering. Another horrific incident involves a cat that Torre befriends. Benno drowns the animal in front of him just because he can, further demonstrating his sadistic nature and willingness to torment this innocent guy. The cruelty continues as Benno humiliates Torre by stripping him to his underwear and spraying him with a hose. Throughout these ordeals, Torre clings to his beliefs, interpreting his suffering as a test from Jesus. His refusal to abandon his principles, even when given opportunities to escape, shows just how deeply his faith runs and how it's influencing his behavior to commit to the cause despite the overwhelming pain and suffering he's going through. The film doesn't shy away from depicting the most disturbing aspects of human behavior. Benno's wife and friends eventually join in the mistreatment because it's been normalized. It's something so casual and expected now. Depending on your perspective, the cult in the movie is religion, for allowing this innocent guy to suffer in pursuit of pleasing God, or cruelty itself. But either way, it's very uncomfortable to sit through. Level 4. The Vigil, 2019. The Vigil centers on Yakov Ronin, a young man who has recently left his Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn. Struggling financially, he accepts a job as a shomer, someone who watches over a deceased person overnight according to Jewish tradition. The deceased in question is Reuben Litvak, a Holocaust survivor with a dark past. But Yakov is not alone with the corpse. The film draws deeply from Jewish folklore, specifically featuring a malevolent entity known as a matzik. Unlike the more commonly known Jewish monsters like golems or dybbuk, the matzik is an obscure demon that feeds on grief and trauma. In fact, director Keith Thomas deliberately chose this lesser-known demon to create something fresh within the horror genre. The matzik in Jewish lore is described as having a spark of life but no body or soul. he's just an invisible, low-level demon created from leftover sparks from the days of creation. The atmosphere builds through the night as strange occurrences escalate. The house becomes increasingly claustrophobic, with darkness pressing in from all sides. Strange sounds start to creep into the house. At one point, Yakov witnesses his own arm bending and twisting unnaturally. When he attempts to leave the house, the Matzik exerts control over his body, causing painful contortions that force him back inside. This physical manipulation represents the demon's power to trap its victims, not just physically, but within their own guilt and trauma. The Matzik manifests differently throughout the film, often appearing as a shadowy figure with its head turned 180 degrees, symbolizing how it's always looking backward, much like its victims who are trapped by their past. It manipulates technology, causing Yakov's phone to display disturbing images and videos that vanish moments later. As dawn approaches, Yakov learns that the Matzik attached itself to Litvak during his time in Buchenwald and has been feeding on his pain for decades. Now it seeks a new host in Yakov, who carries his own burden of guilt over his brother's death. The entity takes Yakov's face as its own, forcing him to confront his personal demons. Eventually, Yakov manages to expel the demon, freeing himself from the curse. Or so he thinks. Does guilt and grief ever truly go away? Legion, 2010. Legion opens with God losing faith in humanity, deciding to exterminate the human race through his angels. The Archangel Michael rebels against this divine order, cutting off his own wings and falling to Earth in Los Angeles. He steals weapons and heads to Paradise Falls Diner in the Mojave Desert, where strangers find themselves trapped in humanity's final hours. The diner becomes ground zero for the apocalypse when elderly Gladys enters and transforms into something monstrous, taunting pregnant waitress Charlie about her unborn baby,
"Said your fucking baby's gonna burn."
then ripping out Howard's throat with her teeth before crawling up the wall like a spider. The possessed woman screeches that everyone will die, an ominous warning that everybody should have listened to. Michael arrives as the sky turns black and hundreds of cars filled with possessed humans surround the diner. He explains that Charlie's baby represents humanity's salvation, which is why the angels want it eliminated. The possessed attackers have black eyes, sharp blackened teeth, and spider-like veins across their skin. They move with unnatural strength and coordination, their bodies controlled by lower angels sent to carry out God's will. During the final wave of attacks, Howard gets dragged away into the darkness. The next morning, Sandra discovers her husband behind the restaurant, Howard hanging crucified upside down, his body covered in massive, horrific boils that have erupted across his skin. The blisters pulse and swell as Sandra tries to free him from his torment, but he's clearly gone. The moment she touches him, Howard's body detonates in a violent explosion of acid. The corrosive liquid sprays everywhere as Percy shields Sandra from the blast, sacrificing himself in the process. The acid burns through everything it touches while Sandra watches her husband's remains dissolve. She breaks down mentally from witnessing the grotesque transformation and explosion. The horror escalates as more possessed arrive, including a knife-wielding child and an ice cream man with demonic features. Gabriel, the other archangel, finally appears with trumpet sounds announcing his arrival. He brings the full weight of heaven's fury, transforming humans into weapons against their own species. The possessed cannot approach Charlie's newborn, but they continue their relentless assault on everyone else. Michael and Gabriel take on one another, with Gabriel managing to pierce Michael's chest, seemingly ending humanity's last defender. Bob ignites the diner's gas main, creating a massive explosion that consumes the remaining possessed in flames. The survivors flee with Charlie's baby as Gabriel pursues them through the desert mountains, desperately determined to complete his divine mission at any cost. Night of the Demons, 1988. Night of the Demons opens with 10 teenagers deciding to throw a Halloween party at Hull House, an abandoned funeral parlor with a blood-soaked history. The location itself carries the weight of all that past carnage. The Hull family met their end in a brutal slaughter that left investigators wading through massive piles of blood and guts. But Angela Franklin, the school's resident goth outcast, picks this cursed ground deliberately, knowing the stories but craving the authentic horror it promises. The house sits on what local Native American tribes considered unholy ground, built over an underground stream that supposedly traps evil spirits within its walls. The teenagers gather around a mirror for what starts as a harmless seance game. The mirror quickly becomes a portal for a demon before it shatters, releasing something that has been locked in the crematorium below. Suzanne becomes the first victim when this demonic entity enters her body, transforming her into a seductive predator. Whenever she has intimate contact with another person, like forceful kisses, she transfers the evil from one host to another. The demon-possessed teens soon begin their hunt, using their former friendships as weapons. Jay gets his tongue bitten off during what he thinks is a passionate encounter with the possessed Angela. Then Stooge snaps Frankie's neck while she's trapped in a coffin, repeatedly opening and closing the lid to sever the arm of her companion. The violence escalates as each possessed teen gains supernatural strength and sadistic creativity to go with it. After this house becomes a violent source of chaos, Roger and Judy become the final targets, forced to flee through rooms filled with dismembered bodies and animated limbs that grab at them from the shadows. It turns out the demons cannot cross running water, but the evil forces controlling Hull House have eliminated every escape route except climbing over the perimeter wall. They must survive until sunrise, when the demonic presence loses its hold on the physical world. If they can. Demons, 1985. In Demons, a mysterious man in a metallic mask hands out free tickets to a horror film screening at a recently renovated cinema in Berlin. The audience settles in for what they assume will be a typical movie experience, watching a movie about teenagers discovering Nostradamus' tomb and unleashing demonic forces after one of them foolishly dons an ancient mask. But in the theater lobby sits an identical mask, displayed as a prop alongside a motorcycle and a sword. Guess what happens next? Yeah, you got it. One woman playfully tries on the lobby mask, and it cuts her cheek. The scratch refuses to heal, beginning to fester and bubble with green pus. As the movie shows a character transforming into a demon after being cut by the same type of mask, reality starts mirroring fiction. The woman's teeth fall out and are replaced by razor-sharp fangs. She develops claws. She's becoming a monster. So, obviously, she starts attacking the other patrons, and each scratch from her claws instantly spreads the curse, meaning that more and more bodies pile up as the transformation spreads through the theater. People try to flee, but discover the exit doors have been mysteriously sealed shut, trapping them inside with an ever-growing horde of weird demonic creatures. At no point does the director, Lamberto Bava, slow down and explain the logistics or mythology behind what's happening. What's the point? The fun is in the carnage. One person becomes a demon, then two, then four, then eight. The surviving humans barricade themselves in the theater's balcony, ripping up seats to create makeshift barriers. But the demons just keep coming, climbing walls, breaking through defenses, their numbers multiplying exponentially. A group of drug-using punks outside the theater get drawn into the chaos when the building itself seems to open doors for them. Even a blind patron transforms, his empty eye sockets getting gouged out by demon claws before he joins the hunt. Scalps get torn off, necks get ripped open, and at one point a goblin-like creature bursts fully formed from a woman's back. I mean, what more could you ask for? Eventually, only two innocents manage to survive, narrowly making it out alive. Only, they're not both survivors. One of them was injured in the movie theater. Just as she transforms, she's shot and killed, leaving our poor guy all alone. Until the inevitable sequel, anyway. Level 5. The Wailing, 2016. In the small mountain village of Gokseong, a mysterious illness begins to spread. Police officer Jung-gu is forced to investigate a series of bizarre incidents where villagers become deranged, their bodies covered in boils and rashes before they end the lives of their families in fits of uncontrolled violence. The arrival of a Japanese stranger coincides with these events, immediately casting suspicion on this unknown outsider. But as Jung-gu delves deeper into the investigation, his own daughter, Hyojin, becomes afflicted with the same mysterious condition. Suddenly, he finds himself caught in an escalating spiritual conflict that transcends any rational explanation. He's not in a police drama. He's stuck in a sinister supernatural war for human souls. This is The Wailing. To try and stem the chaos, a shaman performs elaborate rituals with frenzied dancing and animal offerings, while a Christian deacon attempts to interpret events through biblical understanding. Nobody has the answers, and these conflicting religious perspectives only deepen the deeply uncomfortable feeling of dread throughout the village and the movie. The further into the story we get, the more everything disorients us. Characters who appear trustworthy suddenly become suspects in all of this, while apparent victims reveal themselves as perpetrators to the horrific acts unfolding. There are no clear answers, but there is a lot of devastation. At a certain point, Jung-gu returns home to find a horrific, unthinkable scene. His family lies lifeless, their bodies contorted in unnatural positions. Before them stands a figure barely recognizable as human. Its skin is discolored and covered in weeping sores, eyes rolled back showing only whites, body twisted at impossible angles. And then it moves with jerking, broken motions as bones audibly crack beneath the skin. This is what this movie is so good at. Nothing in this movie is certain. The viewer, like Jung-gu, must question every character's motive and true nature. Is the Japanese stranger a demon or a misunderstood shaman trying to help? Is the mysterious woman in white a protective spirit or something more malevolent? Is any of this going to lead to answers? Not really. The film's power comes from its refusal to provide easy answers. Like the characters, it forces us as the audience to confront the possibility that evil cannot easily be identified or defeated. In this remote Korean village, ancient spiritual warfare is just something that is happening. We can't stop it, we can't comprehend it. If we're lucky, we might survive it. Stigmata, 1999. In Stigmata, Patricia Arquette plays Frankie Page, a Pittsburgh hairdresser and atheist who receives a rosary from her mother. But this innocent gift actually belonged to a deceased Brazilian priest who had experienced stigmata. Soon after, Frankie begins manifesting the wounds of Christ's crucifixion, bleeding holes in her wrists, lacerations on her back, wounds on her head and feet. The stigmata seems to be shifting. The Vatican sends out Father Andrew Kiernan, a convenient priest/scientist who investigates miracles to examine her case. But even he comes to believe that there is no scientific answer to this. Frankie's body is becoming a literal battleground for spiritual forces. Unlike a lot of religious-themed movies, Stigmata doesn't portray religious ecstasy as peaceful communion with the divine, but as brutal physical torment. Frankie's experiences mirror Christ's suffering in graphic detail. Her wrists spontaneously bleed, her back is torn open by invisible whips, her forehead bleeds from phantom thorns. All of these manifestations occur violently and without warning, which means basically any place she happens to be is an opportunity for blood. But it's not just the physical pain. During these episodes, Frankie convulses, speaks in ancient languages she couldn't possibly know, and exhibits supernatural strength. Her body is obviously becoming a vessel for something beyond her control, blurring the line between divine blessing and possession. As Father Kiernan investigates deeper, he discovers Frankie is channeling a message from the deceased priest, speaking fragments of a lost gospel written in Aramaic that threatens the very foundation of the Catholic Church. This gospel suggests Jesus taught that the kingdom of God exists within each person, not in churches or institutions. Apparently, that's not something the Vatican wants out there. The film portrays high-ranking Vatican officials as willing to eliminate anyone who might expose this truth. Cardinal Houseman attempts to silence Frankie permanently rather than allow the message to spread, as though keeping control over believers. The conspiracy extends to hiding archaeological evidence and suppressing translations of ancient texts. But her apartment walls become covered in ancient Aramaic, writing that she produces in a trance-like state, unable to stop or explain why or how this is coming to her. As her condition worsens, the stigmata wounds appear with increasing severity and frequency. The final manifestation, a wound in her side, threatens her life. And the only solution seems to be a very, very violent exorcism that the Vatican hopes will finally kill her. Level 6. Sitchin, 2014. Sitchin, a Turkish horror film, combines forbidden desires with ancient Islamic black magic. Not a common combination. The story finds Özne, a woman consumed by unrequited love for her cousin Kudret, who is happily married to Nisa. Yes, her cousin, just go with it. When Kudret rejects Özne's advances, her obsession transforms into a lust for vengeance. The film's title derives from the Arabic word sijin, which in Islamic belief refers to either a prison at the bottom of hell or a register documenting the names of the damned. I'll let you decide which one is more relevant to this movie. Despite earlier warnings to stay away from Kudret, Özne is desperate to claim Kudret for herself, seeking out a black magician named Ihsan. Her fixation drives her to commission a devastating curse known as the Pig Spell, a particular form of black magic considered one of the most powerful and malevolent in the film's universe. But the ritual to achieve it is not pretty. Ihsan first sacrifices a pig, collecting its head and intestines before he visits a cemetery, where he exhumes a fresh corpse and removes a human leg bone. This combination of elements is deliberately sacrilegious in Islamic context, as pigs are considered unclean or haram animals. The magician wraps the human leg bone in the pig's intestines while chanting Quranic verses that have been obviously perverted from their actual intended use. He soaks Nisa's personal items, hair and menstrual blood, in water, which he then pours over the wrapped bone. The final step involves breaking the bone while invoking demonic entities. The spell targets Nisa, but it extends to anyone sharing her bloodline, promising their demise within 5 nights. What Özne doesn't realize is the blood sample she collected doesn't belong to Nisa. It belongs to her daughter, Jada. This critical mistake creates an unexpected twist when the curse begins affecting Özne herself due to blood relations she wasn't aware of. As the curse takes hold, supernatural phenomena escalate. Nisa experiences terrifying visions, including a bloody pig's head falling from the ceiling during her prayers. Her bedridden mother-in-law inexplicably walks to the kitchen and pours boiling water over herself. When an Islamic cleric attempts to perform an exorcism by placing the possessed person in a circle of Quranic text and striking them to drive out the demon, the horror just gets worse and worse and worse. The movie is clearly a warning against dabbling in the occult, and also to lusting after your cousin. Level 7. Apostle, 2018. In Gareth Evans' 2018 folk horror film Apostle, we followed Thomas Richardson as he infiltrates a remote Welsh island cult in 1905 to rescue his kidnapped sister Jennifer, who's being held for ransom. Posing as a convert, Thomas encounters the charismatic prophet Malcolm, who founded this isolated community with 2 other men after fleeing persecution on the mainland. But as Thomas delves deeper, he discovers the cult's dark secret. They've imprisoned a goddess-like entity, forcing her to consume blood sacrifices to ensure the island's fertility. This parasitic relationship between deity and followers creates a disturbing power dynamic where devotion becomes exploitation. The film introduces the Grinder, a wicker-masked figure who serves as both guardian and feeder of that imprisoned deity. This creature embodies the cult's corruption, being part human, part island, forcing victims through mechanical devices that process human offerings for the goddess's consumption. Each night, followers must fill jars with their own blood as offerings, placing them outside their doors. When these offerings prove insufficient, the cult leaders resort to more extreme measures. One young villager is subjected to the Heathen's Stand, a mechanical device assembled from farming implements. Strapped down into this contraption, his head locked in place by wooden vices, tightened until immobile, he watches helplessly as a drill bit aligns with his skull. Pretty soon, his blood is draining into a collection vessel below, and the villagers are satisfied, convinced they will be protected now that they have what they need. What makes Apostle truly unsettling is how it blends psychological dread with all of the visceral body horror and religious fanaticism. At the beginning, it's just a psychological thriller, but the gradual building of tension aligns with it descending into something far more gruesome and supernatural. As Thomas uncovers these secrets, the community begins to fracture, with power struggles erupting between the founders. The island's deterioration mirrors the moral decay of its leaders, who've perverted their original vision of religious freedom into something monstrous. As with all of the movies on this list, religion is used merely as an excuse to harm others. If you're still craving more TV and film icebergs, why not check out this video on the most disturbing movie endings?